postmodernism. So I'll just present to you my lecture plan. Here we have first we'll go through pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. Then we'll see the features of postmodernism. After that, we'll explore what is the difference between postmodernity and postmodernism. Finally, after that, we'll see what is post-structuralism and postmodernism. How are these two related? And finally, we'll see some of the indicative texts of postmodernism, which are only indicative. Obviously, it is impossible to give an exhaustive coverage to all the postmodern texts. So this is how I have planned my lecture, and I hope you all will benefit from it. Now, moving on with our lecture, we'll try to first understand what is pre-modern, what is modern, and then we'll come to what is postmodern. Now, as it is very clear from these terms, these are temporal concepts. That means these are the concepts which are dependent upon time. And as you can see in this slide, the term modern literally means the present time, the time in which we're living. Historically, as a matter of classification, the modern period is supposed to start once the medieval period is over. And in English literature, the term modern has a special meaning. So obviously, as I've talked about the term pre-modern, that it is also a temporal concept, then what are the features, what are the ways, why do we call some period of time as pre-modern, why do we call some period of time as modern, and why do we call the latter period as postmodern? This we'll see. Now, the pre-modern times generally refers to the time before the Renaissance or the revival of learning. It is, in a way, the time that we call as medieval times. So, the pre-modern period is characterized by a mainly agrarian feudalistic society with its firm footing in religious orthodoxy. As you know that during the medieval times, there was not much development. Scientifically, the people were backward. Superstition was the order of the day. People were highly religious, and religious orthodoxy formed a part of their behavioral pattern. And because of their blind faith in religion, and because of a lack of rational attitude, it was not possible for them to make sense of this world in a rational or reasonable way. Now, the basis of pre-modern thought was that man is not able to make sense of the world until it is the religious scriptures that teach him what the world is. It means that religious scriptures, for example, texts like Bible, are the key to understanding the world. And whatever is written in the religious scriptures used to be the final word. It could not be questioned. Otherwise, the charges of blasphemy or heresy could have been levied upon the individuals, and they could have been sentenced to death, and that too very cruelly. So these were some of the important aspects of the pre-modern thought. Now, pre-modern thought was also uh, about a lot of superstition and orthodoxy. It was about irrationality. The social structure during the pre-modern times was basically a feudal social structure which was based upon an agrarian economy and social hierarchy. These two formed the basic features of the pre-modern society, and this was how uh, the society functioned. So the modern period in English literature is said to start with the reign of Queen Elizabeth, who ruled from the year 1558 to 1603. Now, is it that just in the year 1557 it was medieval period, and in the year 1558 it became the modern period? It is not so. Actually, compartmentalizing periods of literature into watertight compartments, giving exact years and periods is actually only a pedagogical method. It does not happen as if in one year it was pre-modern and the second year it becomes the world suddenly uh, uh, migrates into the modern period. It is not so. So, certain changes, slow changes, were occurring all the time, but these changes became more pronounced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, and that is why, for pedagogical efficiency, we take this period to this year 1558 to be the start of the modern period. Now, the modern period was the period from which you can say that Renaissance also started. Uh, Although European Renaissance came earlier, but Renaissance in England was at its peak during the Queen Elizabeth's reign. Now,
Hello. Hello, Ashish. Somebody has muted yourself. I request the audience, don't mute the speaker. हाँ, तुमको म्यूट कर दिया गया है अभी। कोई किसी ने म्यूट कर दिया, प्लीज अनम्यूट कर लो। हाँ, it's an honest request to the audience. Please do not mute our speakers. It increases the difficulty further.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Hello.
You're audible.
Yes,
Audible,
sir.
audible. You are
Okay,
audible. Okay.
okay. Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I was just talking about the modern period, in which it can be said that the modern period in the history of English literature begins with the reign of Queen Elizabeth, and it was a time of Renaissance, the revival of learning. The old scientific texts, the old philosophical texts of the ancient civilizations like the Greeks and the Romans were reread, were reinterpreted, and it helped the people evolve a sense of rationality. Obviously, it was a time in which people explored the world, tried to discover new places, and all these things led to latter changes which completely changed the manner in which the world was perceived. So, one of the social change that also came up during the modern period was that from a feudalistic setup, the society uh, was changing increasingly to a capitalistic setup, and this led to latter advent of colonialism and imperialism. Now, here I'll just show to you the spirit of Renaissance from Shakespeare's Hamlet. This is Hamlet's dialogue with Rosencrantz in Act 2, Scene 2, where where Hamlet says, "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals." So here you may say that Shakespeare is biased towards the males because he's talking about man, but just goes to show that how uh, increasingly the world was becoming anthropocentric. That is, with man at the center and not God at the center. So this was a change that was coming. I'll also give you a quote by Alexander Pope, where he says, "Nature and nature's law lay hid in night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." So, this is also Pope trying to show the importance of rationality, trying to show the importance of scientific temper. But here, one thing we have to know, that even though science was evolving, uh, till the 18th century, the people did not consider science to be an active opponent of religion. They did not have that feeling that science was opposing the religion. But in the 19th century, things changed. 19th century was a time of upheavals. It was a time of uh, it was the high time of colonialism and imperialism. It was also a time where a lot of scientific development took place. As you know, the Origin of Species, a book by Charles Darwin, talking about evolution, came out in 1859, and it changed the manner in which uh, people saw science and people saw religion, and it led to their complete uh, confusion. People did not know whether to believe in Christianity or whether to believe in scientific developments, whether to believe that man has evolved from apes, or whether to believe that man has come from the race of Adam and Eve. So it was also a time of rapid industrialization and utilitarianism, and it was also a time of colonial empire, where colonialism had engulfed almost every part of the world during the 19th century. So now it is here that we see the advent of the term modernism in literature. And modernism as a literary movement, it can be said to have begun post World War One, and it is influenced by the works of philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, like Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, people like James G. Frazer, who did a lot of work on mythologies, on which T.S. Eliot's work, The Wasteland, is also based. Now, we'll see the features of modernism. So, modernism was about industrialization, it was about scientific development, and it all these things shook the very basis of traditional morality and religious faith. It led to a sense of alienation, disintegration, fragmentation, and loss of faith among the people. The catastrophe of the World War One had shaken faith in the coherence and durability of the Western civilization. And traditional literature and literary analysis was deemed inadequate to reflect this angst, and hence experimentation with form began. Obviously, modern period was a period where people did not find traditional things very interesting. It was an era where unprecedented developments were taking place. The Great War had taken place, and people could not make sense of the world in the traditional manner in which they had been doing. So this led to a change in uh, the manner in which literature was produced. People like T.S. Eliot, people like W.B. Yeats, people like Ezra Pound, people like James Joyce, all these, Virginia Woolf, all these writers were writing a new form of literature. They had broken ranks with traditionalism and found the old ways inadequate to express their new feelings and to express their new uh, views on various things. Experimentation with form began, as we all know, that stream of consciousness was one of the forms which was practiced in poetry too. T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland, which is highly fragmentary, and it involves a lot of quotations, lot of fragmented uh, quotes from different cultures, some of which are from India also. So all these things were a product of modernism. So as far as philosophy is concerned, modernist philosophy believed that there was something universal and absolute There was an objective truth which unifies every civilization. Now, even one can argue that how can uh, we say that modernism argues for absolutism? But here also we'll see that even though modernism celebrates fragmentariness, but it does not, uh, see fragmentariness as permanent thing. It sees fragmentariness as a thing which can be overcome by belief in something which is universal, by belief in something which is absolute. There was a belief in the grand narrative of science, in the grand narrative of history and morality. There was also, to an extent, in literary criticism, a preference for a historical reading and interpretation of texts. That is, by keeping the historical and the social contexts away from an interpretation of a text. They said that text is the only thing, and anything which belongs to the periphery should be kept in the periphery. Uh, Now we come to the term postmodernism. Actually, postmodernism is a term which is applied to writings of literature which uh, have taken place after the Second World War, that is, after the year 1945. A very important philosopher, Jean Francois Lyotard, defines postmodernism in his book, The Postmodern Condition, as incredulity towards meta narratives. It means, now, it is very important for us to understand what is the meaning of the term meta narrative. So, meta narrative is about absolutism. Meta narrative is about the grand narrative. Suppose, for example, the narrative of morality, the narrative of culture. So, all these things, the narrative of history, that history has been linear, all these things are meta narratives which we see as absolute. So, Lyotard says that in the postmodern times, we must exercise incredulity towards meta narratives because just uh, belief in the absolutes and belief in a grand narrative leads us to see the world in a different way, in a traditional way, and it leads us to ignore many things, ignore many evils. For example, during modernism, colonialism was at its peak. We had seen Jallianwala Bagh massacre in India in 1919, but was there even a word from the great priests of modernism then? It was not, because in their scheme of things, India was at the periphery. Exploitation was taking place. So, but they had turned blind eye to that. So, postmodernism believes that modernist ways were inadequate, and most of it was because of this meta narrative, the grand narrative, that there is only one truth and there is only one way of looking at the world. So, this was considered to be inadequate. This was considered to be wrong by the postmodernists. As I've already remarked, that postmodernism, the term is applied to explain the literary trend after the World War II. In a way, it is a critique of the modernist approach, as I've already told you. Postmodernism is a literary and cultural theory that rejects totalizing narratives and it celebrates pluralism. It rejects elitism or highbrow culture and seeks to mix it with the low-brow culture and thus argues for greater democratization. Now, for example, many of you would be acquainted with science. Uh, you all would have read chemistry, for example, and you all would have gone through Niels Bohr, and his model of atomic structure, where he talks about fixed orbits, where you can say with certainty that here you'll find an electron. But all this changed. In chemistry, also, we read about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, where we talk about orbitals and not orbits, where we talk about probability of finding an electron and not the exact place where an electron would be found. So you can see there is some correspondence between development in science and development in this philosophy of postmodernism. So all these things at some point of time, they become interdisciplinary, they become affected. In fact, theory also talks about it, that one discovery or one way of thought in one discipline can be applied to uh, understand a thing in a completely different discipline. So this is also a feature of postmodernism, where interdisciplinarity has become the buzzword. Now, another feature that we'll see is that postmodern literature is often irreverent, it is often parodic, and it is often profane. It is a site for challenging the oppressive norms. Here, you may recall the writings of Mikhail Bakhtin, who talks about polyphony, who talks about carnivalesque. All these things are important components of postmodern literature. Now, postmodernism also believes that human beings don't necessarily have agency against the impersonal forces of history, capital, and other institutionalized forms of power like patriarchy or heterosexuality, etc., which systematically otherize non-conformists. Now, it means that postmodernism believes that there are certain forces, certain impersonal forces over which we do not have any control. For example, we don't have control over racial stereotypes. We don't have control over historical fact of colonialism. We don't have any control over the discourse of patriarchy. These things are ingrained in us and in our society in which we live, and to that extent, they exercise immense power in the way in which we perceive the world. And that is why any thought that we have the power to decide for ourselves is, in fact, a chimera. It is not a fact that we can decide for ourselves. Existential choice is not something that we can make according to the postmodernist theories. Now, we'll also see that postmodernism is unapologetically ideological in its approach. It does not make any pretense of objectivity. As T.S. Eliot talked about objectivity in literature, objectivity in criticism, uh, in postmodern times that has become untenable, because postmodernists, they are very ideologically active. They take active stance, ideological stance. For example, a postmodernist novelist can a postmodern novelist can be a feminist. He or she can be a post-colonialist or a subaltern. So writing from that perspective requires an understanding that I'm not objective. In fact, I am actively writing for a cause, and there is a definite political stance in postmodernism. Now, postmodernism also celebrates multiculturalism and pluralism. As I've already said, postmodernism talks about Marxist approach, it talks about feminist approach, post-colonial approach, identity-based approach. We have examples of LGBTQ literature, Dalit literature, Black literature, etc. And all these are forms of postmodern literature. Now, a very important writer and critic, Terry Eagleton, has this to say on postmodernism, that there is no overarching totality, rationality, or fixed center to human life, no meta language that can capture its endless variety, just a plurality of culture and narratives which cannot be hierarchically ordered or privileged. Knowledge is relative to cultural contexts, so that to claim to know the world as it is simply a chimera. He talks about the fact that we perceive the world, which that part of the world that we see. We cannot hope to know the world in its entirety, because that very idea of a uniform absolute world is imaginary. It is not the truth. So the truth is the product of interpretation. Facts are constructs of discourse. Objectivity is just whatever questionable interpretation of things has currently seized power, and the human subject is as much a fiction as the reality he or she interprets. Now, in fact, the human subject is also seen as fiction. You would recall Roland Barthes in his path-breaking essay, "The Death of an Author," talking about author as a mere scripter. So here also we see that the human subject is reduced to just a, a fictional thing, a scripter. So this is what an idea of postmodernism is. Now, here we'll see about a term, postmodernity and postmodernism. Terry Eagleton goes on to say that postmodernity is a more comprehensive historical or philosophical term, meaning the end of modernity in the sense of those grand narratives of truth, reason, science, progress, and universal emancipation, which are taken to characterize modern thought from the Enlightenment onwards. And postmodernism is a narrower term which incorporates cultural and aesthetic aspects. There is also a term called post-structuralism and postmodernism. Hello. Oh, okay. Okay. Because we have paucity of time, I'll just complete it. So post-structuralism is it refers to the critical theories which have philosophical implications, whereas postmodernism in literature is the practice of adopting innovative and radical ideas in literary works. Now, I'll just go through very quickly on the features of postmodernist techniques. Postmodernist technique talks about historiographic metafiction. It retells history. It talks about the historicity of the text and textuality of history. That is a very important proposition given by Louis Montrose, who is a new historicist critic. And then we have temporal distortion in postmodernist texts. We have non-linear narratives. There is intertextuality, that is absence of textual autonomy. One text refers or alludes to another text. And then there is a feature called poiomenon, which means self-reflexivity. Uh, Dark humor, parody, and carnivalesque are also features of postmodernist fiction. Now, there are some key concepts which are difference, discourse, and power, simulation and simulacra, subalternity, hybridity, and mimicry. These are some of the key concepts. And then we have some indicative text, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, and Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel and Riot are also a part of postmodernist technique. So this is all um, I had to say on, obviously because of paucity of time, I could not take you through some of the very important works and very important features in detail, but I hope that this presentation has been beneficial for all of you. So this is all that I had, and you may now, if there is anything, you may ask or you may discuss with me. Yes,
Thank you, Ashish Priya. Thank you for the engaging lecture. We shall, yes, we shall, we have, what should I say? We shall have the interactive session at the end of the third lecture. Okay. It will be
okay,
a collective interactive session because today we have three speakers, and that's
okay,
why
okay,
there, yes, the time is really very limited. So our
okay,
next speaker is Ayan Mondal, and he's an assistant professor of English, Bankura Christian College. Ayan is like younger brother. He's a gold medalist of the University of Bardwan, standing first in the first class in his master's in 2010. He joined the Department of English in 2011 of Bankura Christian College as an assistant professor, and has been teaching in both the undergraduate and the postgraduate wing since then. He has recently submitted his PhD thesis on Whiteness Studies and the 19th century American classics very recently. He has presented papers at various national and international conferences and has some publications to his credit on Whiteness Studies, post 1950s British literature, among the other areas. He has editorial experience of the reputed journal of the Department of English, namely Appropriations, and at present he is serving as the head of the Department of English, Bangkok Christian College. So without wasting much time, I would request Oil to deliver the lecture. Oil, please.
Okay, am I audible and visible both?
Yes, yes, you
Hello?
are both audible and
Hello?
visible. Yes,
Am I
yes, you
audible?
are both audible and visible.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Shobhita.
Uh, okay, before
Thank
that,
you,
a little
Shobhita, for
request to the
the
audience, please.
kind invitation. Uh,
Actually, I wanted to say that I wanted to request the audience against presenting every now and then. Please, please don't present every now and then. This actually
yes,
disturbs the
yes, yes.
speaker.
Sure.
Okay, Ayan, please proceed. Ayan, please.
I request the participants here to keep their microphones muted. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Shourabda, for this warm invitation. I am in fact privileged to present something. My lecture is titled Black Lives Matter and a New History of Race in America. Now, Black Lives Matter, as we all know, has been a movement since 2013 that began in social media with a hashtag after George Zimmerman was acquitted scot-free despite shooting the Afro-American teen Travian Martin in 2012. In 2014 also, this Black Lives Matter movement took the form of radical street demonstrations following the deaths of, again, two Afro-Americans, Michael Brown and Eric Garner. In 2016, the possibility of the movement gained fresh momentum, and it was expanded as the members of the movement became integrally involved in the presidential elections of America. The movement gained further momentum, as we all know, a few days back, following the brutal death of Floyd by the police officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Whatever the background of the movement, let me clarify at the outset that the movement is centrally inflected with the basic agenda of foregrounding and letting the globe know that Black lives indeed matter. However, my purpose in today's lecture is to relate new inquiry in American academics, scholarship, and critical parlance in the 1990s, which is Whiteness Studies. So that is the basic purpose of my lecture. I am going to relate this nomenclature, Black Lives Matter, with Whiteness Studies, the new critical inquiry in American scholarship. At the outset, let me clarify what Whiteness Studies is. That the basic agenda in Whiteness Studies scholarship is not to asseverate just another protest paradigm or apologetic convention premised on the same drive of peripheralizing the self, but rather to suggest, and this is very important and I highlight this point, to suggest how blackness or otherness has not merely defined whiteness, but also given it a local habitation and a name. So the question is about naming the unnamed, rendering visible the invisible. So in the short time that I have been allowed by Saurabh, here goes the basic structure of my lecture. First, I would try to historicize the category called whiteness, American whiteness. Second, I would try to trace the critical traditions that have helped whiteness studies flourish as a distinctive category. So first part of my lecture would be based on whiteness. The second part of my lecture on whiteness studies. And in the final part of my lecture, I would be trying to look into some of the principles of whiteness studies, particularly those foregrounded by Toni Morrison. There are many other critics as well, but I would be dealing with just some of the principles foregrounded by Toni Morrison in the last part of my lecture. So let me quickly move into the first part, which is historicizing whiteness as a category in America. I begin by quoting a critic called Kobena Marcer, who says, one of the signs of the times is that we really do not know what white is. And Marcer adds, what is white? The real challenge in the new cultural politics of difference is to make whiteness visible for the first time as a culturally constructed ethnic identity, which is historically contingent upon the disavowal and violent denial of difference. I unquote. So the first thing that comes to mind is that the very white identity that was crystallized and given a shape in America was done so at the cost of the other inhabitants in the American soil. Let us say the First Nations and the blacks. I again recall a critic called Harris who talked about legal whiteness. Many laws, in fact, parceled out the differential treatment based on racial categories. For example, we all know these things. Blacks were not permitted to travel without licensed permits, to own property, to assemble publicly, to own weapons, nor were they to be educated. Racial identity was further merged with stratified social and legal concerns. Black racial identity marked who was subject to enslavement. White racial identity marked who was free or at minimum not a slave. The ideological and rhetorical move from slave and free to black and white as polar opposites marked an important step in the construction of race. And I was talking about the different laws that went into being in crafting whiteness in early America. In fact, Hanny Lopez has written a book called White by Law, where he has dealt with this topic. And I will come to that Lopez's part later. American quotes and American documentary evidences, which we often, talk about. We are all aware of that book written by Creveker, Letters from an American Farmer. How did Creveker try to define an American there? Shorodda, is there any voice issue or something like that?
Yes. Your voice is sometimes getting disrupted due to network probably. Yes. So could you please? Are you talking? Are you taking the help of internet, mobile phone network, or kind of broadband? If it's a mobile
No,
phone net,
it's a mobile phone network actually.
Can you use a different SIM, a different phone?
Okay, I'm just trying to. Okay.
Okay.
Please give me just 1 minute time.
It's all right. It's all right.
Hello, Shorodda.
Yes.
Am I audible now?
You're audible. You are clear enough.
Is my voice clear now?
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Please proceed.
Okay. So I was talking about, some legal formulations in America which went into being to craft the category of whiteness. And now I wish to talk about some documents which we often talk about when we deal with American criticism. For example, I begin with Hector St. John Creveker, Letters from an American Farmer. The much quoted topic, the much quoted passage there. What then is an American? This new man. He is either a European or the descendant of a European. Hence, that strange mixture of blood which you will find in no other country. I could point out to a family whose grandfather was an Englishman, whose wife was a Dutch. Please note the nationalities I'm mentioning. Grandfather was an Englishman, whose wife was Dutch, whose son married a French woman, and whose present 4 sons have 4 wives of different nations. He is an American who, leaving behind all his ancient prejudice and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced. He becomes an American by being received into the broad lap of our great alma mater. Now, the point is, it is interesting to note that Creveker, in his long list of ethnicities and nationalities, did not include the Negroes, the First Nations, the Chinese, or even the other racialized ethnic groups. For Creveker, the American identity only signified the strange mixture of diverse European nationalities. I again wish to talk about Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the nation, who argued in another essay observations concerning the increase of mankind and the peopling of countries. I'm just quoting a short excerpt from that essay. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America wholly so, and in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also. The Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of earth. I could wish their numbers were increased. Now, what was Franklin trying to state here? Franklin's wistfulness of a purely white America also propelled him to further ask, why should America, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity, by excluding blacks and tawnies and increasing, he says, the lovely whites? What about the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson? He says in the Declaration, he rings an affirmative note. What does he say? We hold these truths to be self-evident, I'm quoting Jefferson, that all men are created equal. He says, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Paradoxically enough, Jefferson's contention in Declaration of Independence was fraught with falsity, and at best it was only a half-truth. When Jefferson was talking about the equality of all men and the exercise of their unalienable rights, he thought about men of his race, divided by ethnicities, united by their whiteness, which is evidenced in Paul Ford's agreement in the works of Thomas Jefferson, who says Jefferson, thought of the independent black nation, Santo Domingo, to be an appropriate place for the blacks to reside. I was also talking about Hanny Lopez's book, White by Law. In that book, Lopez illustrates at length how several laws in early America wanted only to endorse, establish, legitimize, and institutionalize the normative whiteness. The laws, for example, the Nationalization Act, 1790. For example, the act clearly had twofold aims, as Pinder notes, to suppress slave rebellions and violent uprisings, to curtail the efforts of the First Nations to resist white immigrants on their lands. Both the aims pointed at the fundamental premise of strengthening whiteness in the nation. There are many other laws. I'm not going into all those details. The Bill of Rights, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act. There are numerous other laws, acts concerning civil cases. I'm not going into the details of all those laws. The Page Law of 1875, which was introduced to put an end to cheap Chinese labor and immoral, lascivious Chinese women from entering the US. And slavery in America, we know, it officially ended with Abraham Lincoln's famous Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But slavery ended, racism did not. The subordinate position of the blacks was the natural outcome of white supremacy as a structure that was solidly in place. In fact, blacks and other racialized ethnic groups were not on the opposite side of the racial binary. All that mattered was white skin. Even the lowest of the lowest whites had something that a non-white person could never possess, which was white skin privilege. This was how whiteness worked. So I just tried to give you a sketchy, overview of how whiteness worked in early America. Now, why this distinctive category called whiteness studies? Rather, how do I historicize whiteness studies as a distinctive category in black aesthetics. We have heard about Harlem Renaissance. We have heard about Afro-American realist tradition. We have heard about Henry Louis Gates's signifying monkey. We have heard about the black arts movement. In what sense was whiteness studies novel? In what sense did whiteness studies try to integrate some of the key concerns of black aesthetics? That is something that I wish to look into now. Whiteness studies, we know it burgeoned as a distinctive discipline. Let me name two important books if I'm to deal with literature specifically. One was Morrison's essay, Unspeakable Things Unspoken, the Afro-American presence in American literature. When she was talking about American literature, she was principally talking about white American literature. And that's why I titled my paper, my lecture, Black Lives Matter. I wanted to show how black lives really do matter in white American literature. Second, the key theorization of whiteness in terms of, in the literary context, which started in the US, it was with Morrison's path-breaking book on criticism. We talk about Morrison's novel, but this is Morrison's path-breaking book on literary criticism, Playing in the Dark, Whiteness and the Literary Imagination. How whiteness works in the imagination of the white author. So before coming to that, we have to note, very briefly, of course, I remember the time given by Saurabh, we have to note the important critical, paradigms which came before whiteness studies. And only after tracing that background, I can come to whiteness studies. Let me say that whiteness studies, it burgeoned as a distinctive discipline in black literary criticism in the US in the 1990s for the first time. And it foregrounded a systematic analysis, this is important, systematic analysis of the center rather than the margin, of the racial subject, the white, rather than the racialized object. However, in doing so, it serves to contest and counter the very centrality and privileged subject position of whiteness, by laying bare how intricately and symbiotically it counterbalances itself against its other. So I would, of course, be talking about a symbiotic relationship between the whites and the blacks. Now, already I told you that before coming to whiteness studies, I have to trace the earlier critical paradigms. For example, Harlem Renaissance. The unpalatable and the bitter living conditions of the South almost pushed the blacks to migrate to the North for social justice. And Harlem, it became one of the neighborhoods in New York City. It became the new cultural haven for artists. And in the 1920s, we find a host of artists writing from that corner, and they were trying to give voice to what they called the new Negro. Fawcett, Toomer, Schuyler, James Weldon, Langston Hughes, the list can be multiplied. Alan Locke, the list can be multiplied. Langston Hughes' famous essay, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, it is yet another classic statement of black assertion. So they were trying to assert their identity in the manner of W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. So the prevalent principles of Harlem modernism, if I'm to sum up the principles, what are the principles? Rejection of European cultural standards, recuperations of the ideals of Africa, use of the typical Southern black vernacular, engagement in the rhythms of the blues, the jazz, and the different spirituals, and the search for the new rejuvenated black self. Of course, let me tell you that Harlem Renaissance failed drastically in the 20s. And it was principally due to the Great Depression that took place in America. And the Harlem Renaissance ended due to the effects of the Great Depression. including inflation, unemployment, and severe economic crisis. And a new critical tradition came in, which we loosely ascribe as the tradition of Afro-American realism, or the protest tradition in America. Under such situation, Harlem, ideals were held euphemistic and futile. It was considered futile to celebrate and glorify the uniqueness of the black self and to indulge in self-expression through literature and arts. The next generation of writers, that is from 1940s to 60s, they started getting more rooted. Instead of the romantic ideals of Harlem Renaissance, they started realistically getting rooted to the existing social forces. And let me name Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, who were more or less inclined towards naturalistic writing with indignant contestatory voices against the horrific conditions in black ghettos, if I'm allowed to use that word. Majority of their writings focused on the wretched conditions of the black populations in the specific ghettos of Chicago, Boston, New York. I wish to name an essay by Richard Wright. It was Blueprint for Negro Writing, where, in the form of a manifesto, he was trying to catalog and chart out what Negro artists should do, how committed they should be to society in order to flourish as an ideal Negro artist. You can guess from the name of the essay itself, Blueprint for Negro Writing. So Harlem Renaissance, the realist tradition, and then there was a debate regarding integration. Some black artists started questioning that why should we only indulge in black problems, uniformly with black problems. Let us try to emerge as universal artists. Okay, let us deal with black concerns, but let us not be defined by the black identity. So there was a drive towards integration. Let me tell you that this drive was also countered, particularly by Zora Neale Hurston. And a new movement, in American criticism was set, which we all know, which we all, address as the Black Arts Movement. We know the central figures there were Margaret Fuller and Leroy Jones. So despite the ambience of hope, promise, and optimism that was ushered by the civil rights movement from the early 1950s, the social and political issues of the 60s generated a literary politics, a black aesthetic, and we get the Black Arts Movement, which again was furthered to an extreme level. And a new tradition was set by Henry Louis Gates Jr. in The Signifying Monkey, his famous book we all know, and the essay also, The Blackness of Blackness, a critique of the sign and the signifying monkey, where, in feminism we have heard about écriture féminine. Actually, Henry Louis Gates Jr. was also trying to argue in favor of forming a distinctively black language. That's why signifying, the G is missing there. So a distinctively black language, experimenting with form, syntax, among other concerns. And the book we are all familiar with, The Signifying Monkey, a theory of Afro-American literary criticism. Let me now come to, my main concern in my paper, which is Whiteness Studies. Of course, I will just be cataloging the main principles of whiteness. First of all, let me ask, why Whiteness Studies? And this question was answered by a critic called Anne Louis Keating. A very interesting quotation. Let us see what is there in the quotation. Keating argues, although scholars generally conceptualize the Harlem Renaissance as a black literary movement, I suppose because those identified as Harlem Renaissance writers were people of African descent, bracket close. Why don't they contextualize the transcendentalist movement as a white literary movement? Even though, to the best of my knowledge, transcendentalists were all people of European descent, in our multicultural era, we have studies of Chicano narrative, we have Asian American novels, we have Native American poetry, and so on. But imagine a course or a book devoted exclusively to white-skinned writers. Do we have such a book? Do we have such an anthology? White authors, whiteness goes unnamed in America, invisible in America. And that's why Richard Dyer, in his famous book, White on the Hollywood Reels, says that our job now is to investigate not blackness, but whiteness, is to look into what are the concerns of whiteness. Did whiteness emerge from the blue? Was not blackness necessary? Didn't Black lives matter there? From a strictly literary perspective, these questions were asked also by Toni Morrison, Deepika Jivi. From the Harlem critics to Henry Louis Gates Jr., Afro-American literary criticism has mainly concerned itself with Black literature and literary practices, indigenous narratives, cultural appropriations and subversions, explorations of Black language, and specific vernacular linguistic practices, among other things. If Langston Hughes inspired the Negro middle class to catch a glimmer of their own creativity and beauty turning from the white respectable books, documents, and papers, Richard Wright advocated a new blueprint for Negro writing, I already discussed, that would accommodate the Negro's own sufferings, requirements, dreams, and aspirations without apologetically pleading with white America for justice. If Du Bois, James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, in their own ways, tried to address how Black subjectivity can be celebrated, so that was their concerns. You know, the protest traditions, one after the other, protesting how we have been marginalized, how we have been tortured, how we need to write back. Whiteness critics never wish to write back. Rather, whiteness critics want to foreground, you know, what is there in the already written texts. How did the literary imagination craft whiteness in the texts which are already written? So the question of writing back, you know, is not coming. The apologetic traditions, the tradition of, oh my God, I am marginalized, let me write back. I am feeling down, let me assert my power. These questions do not arise. So Morrison was trying to look at this problem from an entirely new perspective. And she was trying to show that Black lives do matter. Black lives have mattered in white American literature, particularly the 19th century founding national literature of America, even if those literary pieces were race-free. For example, in a novel like The Scarlet Letter, which does not deal with any single Black character at all, there is a metaphorical blackness which is at work. In one of the seminars at Bankura University, I presented a paper there to show that how Hawthorne was romancing on the Black shadow there. So it was not necessary that the novels authored by the white persons should have to deal with racial concerns. No. Even in novels which did not configure Black characters, Blackness was equally operative. Therefore, I would like to include some of the key concerns of Toni Morrison, one after the other, in Playing in the Dark. What is Morrison trying to investigate in white American literature? Number one, the role of the Africanist characters as surrogates to regulate the white writerly imagination. Africanism, I quote Morrison, is the vehicle through which the American self knows itself. as not enslaved but free, not repulsive but desirable, not helpless but licensed and powerful, not historyless but historical, not damned but innocent, not a blind accident of evolution but a progressive fulfillment of destiny. Number one. Number two, Morrison was also trying to look into the ways in which the Africanist idiom, language, dialect has been employed in white texts to highlight difference. How the dialogue of the black characters is constructed as alien, estranging dialect made deliberately unintelligible by spellings contrived to defamiliarize it. Third, the specific purposes to enhance and project the ramifications of the ideology of whiteness through an Africanist character. For example, in Huckleberry Finn, there would be no adventures of Huckleberry Finn without the black character Jim. The friendship between Huck and Jim is, it is always a facade. Jim is the vehicle through which Huck knows his whiteness, even if he severs his ties with with a white American, even if he plans to go west, even if he wants to emerge as a new individual. Jim is necessary. Jim is a vehicle. Jim is an agent through which Huck knows his white self. So, number four, analysis of African narratives represented within a master narrative as having the ulterior purpose of projecting a discourse on ethics, social and universal codes of behavior, assertions about and definitions of civilization and reason. This brings me towards the end of my lecture. Just give me 2 minutes. The 19th century American texts, the founding national American literature, therefore, show how racism destroys those who perpetrate it. And even while documenting rehearsals for American democracy, they end up exposing the empty signification of whiteness. If whiteness is defined by the blacks, if black lives matter so much, then where is the centrality of whiteness? Where do we find whiteness as a category if the black part is removed from there? This term is what an eminent critic, Nita Banerjee, she is a professor in America, calls, the facade of ethnic foil. The black or ethnic subjects in the text chosen, in the texts I talked about, they become partakers in the fabrication of whiteness. And I wish to quote Nita Banerjee. Nita Banerjee says, by becoming alternative creators of ethnic minstrel masks, the ethnic subjects whom white minstrelsy had originally both mimicked and disavowed reappear to oversee the destruction of the white minstrel performer. The project of making whiteness visible, therefore, merely serves to expose whiteness's dependence on and the sustenance it draws from all forms of otherness. Such an exposition makes whiteness merely an empty signification. Once the foil of ethnicity is withdrawn, it explodes what Richard Dyer called the fallacious perception of whiteness. Richard Dyer's famous statement was, other people are raced, whites are just people. Black lives did matter. It mattered in the framing and crafting of whiteness in early America. It mattered in designing the so-called national literature of America. The job of whiteness critics is to highlight and show, to lay bare that black lives did obviously matter. Thank you so much for giving this patient hearing, and thank you, Dr. Nag, once again.
Thank you and welcome, Ayan, for delivering such an engaging and beautiful lecture. Now we We are the third slot of the panel, and the third slot will be hosted by Ashim Kumar Betal, Faculty, Department of English, Manbhum Mahavidyalaya. So let me request Ashim Kumar Betal to host the third slot. In the third slot, the lecture will be delivered by Dr. Partha Sarathi Mondal. So I request Ashim to host the third slot.
Am I audible?
Audible.
Hello.
Audible.
Good afternoon, everybody. And special thanks to Dr. Mondal and Dr. Ashish Priya for their beautiful lectures. And I again thank to Ayan Mondal for concluding his lectures within the time frame. Now, I heartily introduce to you our third speaker, who is none other than Dr. Partha Sarathi Mondal. Partha Sarathi Mondal is an assistant professor and head Department of English at Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, Manbazar, Purulia, West Bengal. At present, he is the head of the institution also. Dr. Mondal has published many research papers in national and international journals of repute, a good orator with academic zeal. He has presented innumerable invited talks and presented articles in national and international seminar conferences. He is also acting as supervisor of Sidukano Bisa University, West Bengal. Now, I would like to request Dr.
Thank you.
Partha Sarathi Mondal
Thank you, Ashim Kumar Betal, and thank you, Dr. Shourabh Nag, for this kind of platform and the chance that he has given to me. And I will remain thankful to him, and I will try to do justice to the time that has been allotted for me. So, and it is a really, pressure, খুব চাপের ব্যাপার. After Professor Ayan Mondal has spoken in such a, such an entertaining and such an informative way. So thank you, Ayan, very much. Once again, I listened to you the last part of the lecture.
Thank you, Partha.
And the area that I have selected is that reading Indian writing in English. In the context of history and historiography. So I have divided my lecture into three parts actually. And the first part, what is history and what is historiography? And in the second part, I will try to define how history writing is controlled by imperialism, the power that be, and its reflection in the writing of Indian writing in English, with special reference to the representation of Northeast literature, how Northeast literature is reflected in Indian writing in English. So, you know that history, as we all know, the past and its verbal reconstruction, heritage, instructions, and often both. And history never can be or have been innocent like any other representation mediated by the author whose consciousness bears the influences of the ideological conflicts of his time. So in that context, I would like to refer to one very important event that happens after independence in India. You know that Ramesh Chandra Majumdar, a famous historian, নেতাজি সুভাষ বোস ওনাকে মামা বলতেন. তো what happens that Ramesh Chandra Majumdar was given the charge to writing Indian struggle for independence, history before independence, and he was given certain parameters that you will write this and you cannot write this. He refused. He wrote his own version. He wrote his own version of history. So there are two versions. If you read India Wins Freedom by Kalam, you will get one story. And if you read the history written by, written by the scholars allotted by, that political, that power, that the power that was there, you will get a different version. So my point is, it's not my point, but rather it is universally acknowledged now that history is never innocent. And like any other representation mediated by the author, whose consciousness bears the influences of the ideological conflicts of his time. Historical discourses are therefore ideological expressions and are inextricably related to the structures of power, either for legitimation or subversion. So in history, you will find, I will give certain examples, that the power will control. You can write this, you cannot write this. The power group, the history actually is the story of the power group. The real history in the sense the real happenings hardly come. If it comes other way around. So they are therefore sites of ideological conflicts. For example, you know what happens at present, Nehru versus Patel, you know the politics, that the present power, they're trying to glorify Sardar Patel, not, but earlier regime tried to glorify Nehru. There is many universities, many institutions in the name of Jawaharlal Nehru, as if he was the lone fighter of Indian freedom. He was the lone soldier of Indian freedom movement. The way he is portrayed, the way he is projected. So, but, and another instance, you know that we know that in Jhansi, Rani Jhansi of Jhansi, that Rani Jhansi is portrayed as a very brave lady and all, but we don't know that there was one lady whose name was Jhalkari Bai. So Jhalkari Bai actually fought the real battle in the guise of Rani Jhansi. Rani Jhansi came later on. This is history, fact. But in history, actually, I did not read it when I was a student of, a student of class 2, or in my 10 class 2 levels. So Jhalkari Bai, I did not heard the name of Jhalkari Bai. But the fact is that it was Jhalkari Bai who fought the real battle under the guise of Rani Jhansi, and Jhansi came much later. But that history is not written because Jhalkari Bai belongs to a downtrodden, the poor, the Dalit class. And another, if you now go through the Saraswati Shishu Mandir, that history textbooks, some of the facts which we know are not there, are presented in other way. I'm not going to that because that would be a little bit political. And you see, in Mayabati, you know, the Kasiram, BSP, Dalit, Mayabati in Uttar Pradesh, Mayabati through architecture, Hathi, you'll find that in different parks, some big architectures, elephant. So through architecture, she is asserting a Dalit supremacy. Dalit, their supremacy. And Kasiram, the founder, is actually highlighted as a guru, as a great hero of Bahujan Samaj, the Dalit class. So, and another point is that is very, very important, that we know that Sipai Mutiny was started by Mongol Pandey, but the fact is it was started by some Matadin Bhangi. Matadin Bhangi. He was a sweeper, method class. The British clashed with him. He was also hanged. So, but that history is not there the way Mangal Pandey is portrayed. The Mangal Pandey is highlighted. So these are the instances. Some more instances are there. I'm not going to. Not going to that. So these are the instances that prove that history is not objective. History is always controlled by the power that be. So Dalit class, their history is not, not reflected. And if you Google about Matadi Bhangi, you'll say many people are protesting and trying to have their justice. That why not Matadi Bhangi be given the prestige? In that way, you will find a different, news in the Google. So, and now at present, what happens? So this is the nature. This is the way history is written. And what happens with the arrival of deconstructive study in the West? That two perspectives. One is diachronic perspective. Another is synchronic perspective. Diachronic, that is the period. A historical time frame it refers to. So Christianity, according to Christianity, what is history? I'm just talking of the development trajectory in the West, history and historiography in the West and its development trajectory. Diachronic perspective, what is that? History, Christianity, and the book of Genesis. So according to Christianity, there is what is the purpose? The purpose is to collect, combine, arrangement, and determination. In that way, history is to be written. Then Hegel, another important philosopher, he says the motive force of history is a supra-human entity, the world spirit. Dialectics as the mode of progress, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, contradiction, resolution, progress. Human reality and truth as continually being modified with each dialectic leap, secular but essentially idealistic and deterministic. This is what Hegel's concept of history. And according to Marx, what is the point? Class struggle, power, that capitalist bourgeois society. So distribution of production, forces of production, and then from there will be a movement, and through movement one from one one ladder to another ladder, the society, the history of human civilization moves. So this historical discourses posited the past as an uninterrupted continuity and interpreted literary works by placing them against the background of a grand historical continuum. So these historical discourses, uninterrupted continuity, there is a continuity. From past to present, there is the continuity, the power that is there, who are the ruling class, they are the ruling class. So there will be a ruling class, there will be exploitation, it will go on. In that way it will go on. মানে কিছু লোক দুধ খেতে পাবে না আর কিছু দুধ ড্রেনে ফেলা যাবে, এটাই হচ্ছে ইতিহাস, এটাই সভ্যতা। কি am I audible? শোনা যাচ্ছে? হ্যালো অসীম, শোনা যাচ্ছে? Okay. So
yes sir, you are audible.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So
Clearly audible.
So this is actually, in that way, the notion of history now will see that how it changes, and then I will try to put that theoretical framework in the writing of in Indian writing in English actually. So now that, and what is synchronic perspectives, postmodern and post-structuralist reinterpretation of history as mere representation and discourse. history neither objective nor capable of representing the past in its entirety. Mind it. History is, not capable of representing the past in its entirety. History represents past only through discourses made up available through some cultural text, of which literary texts are also one. And new historicism and the interrogation of the continuity, history as ideologically charged, literary text to be read in conjunction with rather than against the backdrop of history. Ideology is what? A Marxist term actually. It's a set of beliefs, habits controlled by a particular class. And mind it, that control is always by the class who have the money, who have the, industrialists, that they are the ruling class actually. They control it. So history is a representation of dominant ideology. So this is actually, uh, this is the fact. And with deconstruction, as per Derrida, it is, that Derrida's deconstruction is a way to attack a text in a broader sense. So when we apply the deconstruction, what happens that the other side of history, which is not written, which is subjugated, subverted, came into being, came into the forefront. So a deconstruction as anti-fundamentalist interrogates foundational centers as linguistic constructs having no absolute meaning outside the structures of human language. Saussure, arbitrariness, relationality, the constitutive nature of human languages. Language does not mirror reality as it is. We constitute reality and our worldview through our language. So it is we who actually control, construct our belief, our history, what we give the meaning actually. This is my point. So if you take it into broader sense, so therefore the history that we have written, that we have is written by a dominant power, dominant ideology. So that means you are going not to write something. You are going not to write, not to include something else, which you are not including, which are challenging, which can put challenge to you. So same thing I will move on to, because it is already 2, I think, that the participants are not in a not in a position to listen. Bear with me. And you know that in India, English language came as a tool to control, to teach the India, to create clocks, so that British Raj can continue over here. They can have some eligible clocks who would continue with their interest. In that way, English language came into being. So after independence, I'm now moving to the Indian writing in English. You see that in Indian writing in English, there are one second. Yes. That Iyengar, K.R. Srinivas Iyengar, Indian writing in English, 1962. M.K. Naik, A History of Indian English Literature, 1982. A.K. Mehrotra, An Illustrated History of Indian Literature in English, 2003. What is my point? What I have seen in these books, that Northeast is not represented properly. Northeast in the sense, Northeast literature. The literature written in the Northeast is not represented. Why? Because as I have told, that history is always not objective, is subjective, is controlled by the power. So before I go into that, what was the aim of writing this history? What Iyengar says in writing his Indian writing in English 1962, I'm reading out. We in the Commonwealth are many, though we speak, so to say, one language. In India, we wish to believe that we are one nation, though we actually speak in a dozen different languages. Indo-Anglican literature too is our literature. The literature literature which, with all its limitations, still taught us to be a new nation and a new people. Indian writing in English is just one of the voices in which India speaks. It is a new voice, no doubt, but it is much Indian as others. So, and what is Iyengar's claim? India is one nation. Primacy of national identity as opposite to linguistic, caste, regional and religious identities. One nation, one identity. So what is the motive behind writing this English? And you know, if you remember, 1962, that was a time of, ভাষা আন্দোলন, বিভিন্ন স্টেটে ভাষা আন্দোলন হচ্ছে, এই ভাষার ভিত্তিতে স্টেট ভাগ, এ নিয়ে আন্দোলন চলছে প্রচুর। সেই ব্যাকড্রপে, সেই টাইমে Iyengar was given the charge to write this one. So India is one nation, primacy of national identity, mark it, as opposed to linguistic, caste, religion and religious identities. So one nation. If you speak in English, you are eligible to be there in Delhi, Bombay, everywhere. You are Indian. And if you speak in Bengali, then you can be labeled as, oh, you are a Bengali. If you speak in Hindi, you are a Bihari. The growth of Indian writing in English, which it calls Indo-Anglian literature, is conterminous with the growth of the nation. So the growth of the nation and the growth of Indian writing in English, there must be a similarity, and there is a similarity. There is there is a connections between the two. So Indian writing in English has played its role in the making of a new nation, and therefore Indian writing in English was one of our national literatures. Indian writing in English should be considered not as part of English literature, and should be considered as one of the Indian literatures. Mikey. Thus, Iyengar sets up the new agenda for Indian writing in English. In this formation, the central concerns are representation of Indians, Indianness and Indian ways of life. Certain important figures, sites are thus excluded. You see, in that book, you will not find a much mention of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose as you find the mention of Gandhi, the influence, Gandhi and influence. There is a chapter over there, if I remember correctly. And so Gandhi is a popular, is a father figure. So as a father of the nation, as politically, which we know, Iyengar tried to establish Gandhi, there in literally. So this is one point. And now come to M.K. Naik, History of Indian English Literature, 1982, 20 years later. Naik's works in consonance with the concerns of the Sahitya Academy. It was published from Sahitya Academy. I have the book with me. I can show you. The national organization which works towards the promotion of cultural unity of the country, the Indian sensibility. What is Naik's views on nomenclature are also on the same lines. Naik's views on nomenclature are the same. Indian sensibility, Indian writing in English, that is the name. And what he says now, I'm just quoting, reading it out. Sahitya Academy has recently accepted Indian English literature as the most suitable appellation for this body of writing. What he has written, that body of writing has been termed as Indian English literature. The term emphasizes two significant ideas. First, that this literature constitutes one of the many streams that join the great ocean called Indian literature. Mark it. Which, though written in different languages, has an unmistakable unity. And secondly, that it is an inevitable product of the nativization of the English language to express Indian sensibility. That it is an inevitable product of the nativization of English. English has been nativized. Our language, a Bengali writer and you see BRE writer writing in Arkenar and Tamil writing in English. So we have, in that way, we have nativized English, and to express what? Indian sensibility. So what these two writers, what they say, what is their take? Their take is very simple: to construct an Indian sensibility. I will complete within few minutes. So now, and Naik, in Naik's book, yes, what is the position of Ambedkar and Bose? If we go into the, into that very book, B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of independent India's constitution and the most outstanding leader produced by the scheduled classes, was a stern critique of the Gandhian approach to the problems of the untouchables in what Congress and Gandhi have done to the untouchables. Even lesser detail is provided about Subhash Chandra Bose. So this is about Ambedkar. Only this much is mentioned. And Subhash Chandra Bose, whose brave attempt to achieve Indian independence through armed struggle by organizing Indian National Army in East Asia in 1943-45, is one of the brightest chapters in the history of modern India. Given their critical opinions on certain subjects, their unqualified assimilation into the canon of Indian writing in English is problematic. If you take Ambedkar, if you take Bose, then you have to show that they are against Gandhi, they are against Nehru. So the power that are controlling, that are behind Sahitya Academy or behind Srinivas Iyengar, will not be pleased. So therefore, Ambedkar and Bose, as they do not suit to Indian sensibility, in the construction of Indian sensibility, so therefore they are very partially mentioned. So here again, what is my point, that again history appears to be writing, Indian writing in English, that is literary history, is also very much subjective. So this is one point. And so Sahitya Academy in producing a nationalist literary culture to consolidate the Indian nation. Am I audible? Shona jacche? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
So, does it appear boring? No. Hello?
No,
Bore
Bhagalpur,
লাগছে না?
no,
sir,
please
no,
go ahead.
sir.
Bhagalpur.
Bore করছি না তো?
No,
No, sir, no.
it's all right. It's
Okay. So, Sahitya Academy in producing a national literary culture to consolidate the Indian nation. This is the role of Sahitya Academy. So, employing the category of a naturalized ahistorical Indian identity, a hegemonic construction that obscures the multiple identities such as linguistic, caste, regional, religious and gender identities of Indian people in the post-colonial context. So when you are trying to Indian sensibility, that means you are ignoring caste, religion, gender identities and the Indian people, their problems. So India as a whole. So you are taking or putting certain things which go into positively contribute to Indian sensibility. This is my point actually. So Tharu actually has pointed out one important thing. I'm quoting it out. The attempt to establish an Indian tradition and develop in the reader an authentic Indian sensibility that would replace and complete the primary European sensibility of the idle reader was underwritten by even Iyengar contradictions. The Indian tradition commonly derived from Vedic and post-Vedic texts and therefore was an upper caste, indeed Brahminic one, as elitist as its Western counterpart. But the problem is compounded by the fact that such a constitution of the Indian tradition was not an Orientalist one. What happens? that Iyengar, I mean, uh, that yes, Nayak. So if you say Indian tradition, what is Indian tradition? Indian tradition is what? The Vedic tradition. So if you take Vedic tradition into one, then you are ignoring the British tradition that was for 200 years, that established over here 200 years. So thereby the power that controls the Indian writing in English, that controls the history of Indian writing in English, not the Indian writing in English. Author they can write whatever, but when they are put in the history book, they are put in a way so to contribute the Indian sensibility defined by the power that be. So now, in what is there in Iyengar and Nayak about and Gandhi? Both Iyengar and Nayak have extensive chapters on Gandhi in Indian writing in English, especially the Gandhian novel. In the recent study titled The Mahatma Misunderstood, the Politics and Forms of Literary Nationalism in India, Senal Senghi explores the connectedness of Gandhianism to Indian writing in English. This is another book. I will be coming to that later on. The author mentions the critique from South India produced a whole series of academic studies to defend not only the study of English as an Indian language, but also the quality of Indian fiction and poetry in English, in which Gandhi was used as a touchstone. How much Gandhi? Gandhian, there is a chapter, Gandhian whirlwind, if I remember well, in M.K. Nayak's book. In this way, Gandhi was transformed from being merely an influence on the general culture milieu of the nationalist India and a competent a polemicist in English to becoming a specific forebear to the entire project of Indian writing in English. As I was saying, that politically Gandhi is Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, and that that very image of Gandhi is also established in Indian writing in English, where when Bose, when many more, they are ignored. And I have just referred to some of the areas where Bose and Ambedkar are mentioned partially, one or two of few lines. So this is which could be read as a variety of ways where possibly reductively co-opted into the canon of writing, example Gandhian values. So, and now come to Mehrotra. And in Mehrotra, and name of the book, An Illustrated History of Indian English Literature, 2003, that was published. Another 20 years after that. So, the volume is made up of essays devoted to either to a single author or a group of authors. You know, that is the collection of essays. Mehrotra book is a collection of essays. Different writers have contributed some essays. That is Mehrotra. So, and to a genre and commission to individual contributors who bring in their own points of view, writing styles and decisions about the inclusion, exclusion of particular authors with no editorial intervention in the selection. It is conceived as an omnibus. This policy allows for greater flexibility, and Mehrotra says that there is not one continuous story but several disjunct ones being told in these pages. So he was an editor, but no intervention. What perhaps one essay I have contributed, it is there, no change. One Saurav has contributed, that is there. Though I'm just giving you the example. So there is no unifying voice running through the text. Beginning is not tried to conclusion, nor past to present. An authoritative narrative eschewed in favor of tentative one. So there is nothing like, I mean, nothing, no one voice, multiple voices, multiple writers. So now I am coming to the last part actually. Same thing happens to the mentioning of Northeast. Northeast does not figure even as a passing reference, not in I mean not in Iyengar, neither in I mean, neither in Nayak, only a passing reference there in the book, uh, by I mean this in Mehrotra book, one essay by some Professor Bose, I'm sorry, Guho's essay, Life and Work of Warrior Elwin. It is important to know why these histories of Indian writings by Anga, Nayak and Mehrotra do not mention and discuss literature from the Northeast. I mean, actually the point is, uh, I mean, the point is actually that you know that in Northeast there is always an insurgency. There is, I mean, at that moment when these books were written, uh, insurgency against in terms of, uh, I mean, uh, I mean, uh, there were movements to get free from India. I mean, there was certain local movements that they are not, their culture is different. They're not one with Indian culture. Their food habits are different. Their physically their appearance are different, and therefore their writings. If you go through the writings of some of the writers of Northeast, you will find the same thing. They're writing in a different vein, which do not go in contributing the Indian sensibility, and therefore they are I mean not included in these writings of history books of Indian writing in English. So I conclude with a point that the power, the concluding authority, their aim is to construct Indian sensibility. So when Northeast writings, I mean writings of the Northeast Indian writers, do not keep consonance with Indian sensibility defined by the power that be, therefore they are not included. So due to paucity of time, it is almost to 10. So I conclude over here. I can take one or two questions, and thank you. I should call it a day. I can take one or two questions. Thank you.
Thanks to Dr. Partha Sarathi for his elegant observations on Indian English literature as a historical perspective. Due to lack of time, we are now going to start our. We are not going to start our interactive session, but if you have any questions to Dr. Mondal, you can ask him in the chat box.
Sorry,
Now
Ashim, to interrupt. Actually, Professor Ayan Mondal is also waiting for the interactive session, and Ashish Priya is probably there. So it will be a collective interactive session. So the audience can ask question to three of them. Okay.
Okay. Better.
Do you have any question, audience?
I think there is no any question.
Sir, I have a question
Shubhadeep. Okay.
for Ayan, sir.
Okay. Please ask your question.
Okay. Ayan, sir, what is
Fine. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, you are audible. Please. Go ahead.
Ayan, sir?
Yes.
You are audible. Please go ahead.
Yes.
What is your take on the nomenclature of the official residence of the American President White House, not Black House? Isn't it a symbol of white supremacy?
Thank you so much for this very interesting question. Of course, there has been, when I worked on whiteness studies, there has been a lot of critical controversies over this nomenclature, White House. Even when Obama got elected as the Black President of America, there were critical rows over this issue, like the Black President in the White House. Yeah, of course, it is conveying a kind of Black supremacy. There is no denying on this, and there are articles on this as well. Thank you for this question.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Okay,
There
I
is
have
a question
I
in
have
the chat box
chat box. Okay.
to Ashish Priya sir. What are the references text that you were about to mention in the last slide?
I
In
think
the last slide.
Ashish Priya left due to network issues, so we can't entertain the question. I have a question to Parthoda. I was thinking one thing. Parthoda mentioned that the Vedic India uh, should be the actual starting point for calling it to be truly Indian, and we can, in this way, we can brush off the British influence. Hmm.
Yeah.
So, but my question is, it's not actually a kind of question, but I was thinking, uh,
Hmm.
there was a time when before that Vedic India, what about the pre-Vedic India? Why should we consider Vedic India to be the starting point?
You are logically correct that before, but that is also the British version of a version of history, because the British, they are of the opinion the Aryan, they came from Europe. Okay, so that is the British version, but Indian version is no, that the Aryan people, they were very much here in India. They are India, and they have certain reasons. And you see, if you just read the history book of plus, I mean, class 10, there it is mentioned, a group of historians believes the origin of the Aryan people are in India. Some people, some Western historians, they believe they are from Russia, that Volga, and that part of Europe. So there is a debate also, but yes, if emphasis is given on Aryan culture, that is Vedic culture, why not the earlier culture?
Yes, the
Yes.
Dravidian people were there. The Vedic people
Dravidian
too.
people were there.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, so we are at the last phase of today's session. Today, we have two things to announce. The first one is a very important announcement. Uh, we released a registration form, and numerous people, hundreds of people tried to register, though many of them could not. We had to withdraw the registration form due to the huge rush, because our participant, the number of participants is limited in Google Meet. It's 250. So we had to withdraw the registration form. Later we decided to make it an open forum, so that anyone wanting to join may join if there is a vacancy. So we withdrew the registration form to avoid the rush, actually, and to open it. Now the problem is about sending the certificates. So I request the audience, those who registered, they need not send any mail, but those who did not register, please send me a mail. My mail ID is Sourav Nag, SOURAVNAAG @gmail.com. And if you have any screenshot of your participation, please attach it with your mail. That will help us identifying you and ensure your certificate. Okay. Uh, Before the valedictory session begins, I would like to thank the audience. It is the second phase of the web lecture series. I'm really thankful to you on the behalf of the English department. I acknowledge the cooperation of all the faculty members, especially Ashim Kumar Betal, Bulti De, and others, for supporting me heartily all through the two phases. Now it is time to say goodbye to you at the end of the second phase. But people say kabhi alvida na kehna, so never say goodbye. And we are thinking of organizing one day lecture to be delivered by distinguished people from all over the world. And probably that lecture or the one day lectures would begin in the month of July. Okay, because we are also very tired running the thing for 15 days or more. I'm really indebted to the audience for your support. I never expected that kind of consistent participation throughout 15 days. thank you very much for supporting us, for giving your love. We are dispatching your certificates by mail. Please be patient and wait a while. It's a tremendous task to complete, and we are so few. So we are trying our best. And one thing I also want to add here, that our college is a very small college situated in the rural Bankura, but we are not without ambition. We are trying to grow big, and we are not without diligence as well. So we are trying our best, and we plan to give the world something meaningful during these hard times. So that is why we organized the uh, sessions actually, and I hope that you liked it, audience. And now I would request our principal sir, who is also an eminent poet, Dr. Vijay Kant Dubey, to address the valedictory session, and if possible, recite a poem uh, that he has written. So welcome, Dr. Vijay Kant Dubey. I would request sir to unmute yourself. Sir, you are muted. Please unmute yourself. There is a symbol of microphone. Touch it.
Good afternoon, my dear colleagues, respected speakers, friends, scholars, boys and girls. This is the last day of the international web lecture series coming to a close, for which I thank you all for giving a patient hearing as well as participating in it. We had a tryst with so distinguished speakers of various fields, arenas of literature, delivering and discussing the things of their choice in the best possible honor befitting us too. Before I thank you all for this participation, I would like to read a few of my poems which I composed. But before I read the poems, I would like to say how the literary people and academics have influenced me in my writing of poetry for some 30 years and more. As such, Nisim Ezekiel, Jayant Mahapatra, Dilip Chitre, Adil Jusawala, O.P. Bhatnagar, I.K. Sharma, R.R. Menon, K.V.S. Murthy, Dr. S. Krishna Bhatt, Dr. Premanand Kumar, Dr. C.V. Venugopal, Dr. G.S. Balrama Gupta, Dr. K.C. Srivastava, Dr. M.K. Nayak, Dr. Narendra Pal Singh, Dr. Sirish V. Chindade, Dr. M. Rajeshwar, and novelist Khushwant Singh. I used to show the rough drafts and manuscripts of my handwritten poems to them, and they used to send their comments by post. But I never went after fame, wrote poetry mainly for self-pleasure. I am reading one of my poems which I have written, Eklavya. Eklavya, how had it been, Guru Dakshina, that he asked for your thumb, expertise thumb, as for Guru Dakshina, his Guru Dakshina. And you gave it as your Guru Dakshina, Dakshina to him. Why? Why did you cut and give to him Eklavya? Eklavya, was it good on your part to cut and give to him? Thank you very much. Professor Nag, the session has come to a close. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm here.
Shall
Okay,
I have to recite one more poem? Or
no, sir. I think it's the time of lunch is
yes,
actually
yes,
is
yes,
so everyone is wanting to go back.
yes.
So once again, I thank everyone, all the three speakers, delivered their lectures today, all the speakers who delivered lectures, who responded to our call, and all the faculty members of our Department of English, and our principal sir, of course, who is our patron. So we promise to return very soon with a host of new programs during this COVID-19 thing. And we shall be continuing to spread wisdom with the help of those who have enriched themselves in a literary way. So please give us permission. We take leave and we call it a day. Thank you very much for supporting us, for loving us. Thank you.